Hi, my name is Emily and I am 20 and I'm a second year uni student in Exeter, and today I want to talk about one of my favourite things, which is rest. Sleep is one of my favourite things in the world, so I'm excited to talk about this, and it's one of my favourite things to kind of read about what God's heart is for us in rest. So rest, where does it first come from? It first comes from Genesis. When God made the world, we all kind of get taught in primary school that he made the world in 6 days, and then on the 7th day he rested, which then made way for, in the next book of the Bible, in Exodus, when Moses received the 10 commandments from God on Mount Sinai. One of those commandments is that we should be taking a Sabbath day. And that means there was lots of very strict Jewish rules for keeping the Sabbath in those days, and so that's, yeah, we're going to kind of think about that and what it means for us now, what Sabbath means for us now, and yeah, is it still relevant? What do we do with it? So yeah, we have in Exodus, Mount Sinai, God gives Moses the 10 commandments, one of which is take a Sabbath. Here are lots of rules about it. And you might be thinking, well, you know, Jesus died for us so that we don't have to be following the rules anymore. Jesus was the fulfillment of Moses' law, and that's true, and that's really awesome. But I want to argue that God's heart for the Sabbath and God's purpose for the Sabbath hasn't changed for us, and that God's heart for it was still the same all the way back when Moses received the 10 commandments to now. So yeah, one of the first little verses I'm going to look at is from Mark. And we read a lot about Jesus performing miracles on the Sabbath, which was against the Jewish laws, because that involved working on the Sabbath, and so was not complete rest. And so the Pharisees at the time were angry at Jesus breaking these rules, and they thought that he must not be God because of that, and all of these things. And one of the verses in Mark says, this is Mark chapter 2, verse 27 and 28. Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people, and not the people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even over the Sabbath." That's big. So what Jesus is saying here is that even though there were loads of rules in the Old Testament, God's heart for the Sabbath was for it to meet our requirements, our needs as people. So for the Sabbath to be a gift to us, rather than us absolutely busting ourselves to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. Jesus says the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people, and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. And that's really cool. And you might be thinking that Jesus is just saying that, and that's a new Jesus thing. But this is really cool, and I find this really cool. If we go back to, so Hosea was a prophet in the Old Testament, again, long before Jesus. And he, the writings in Hosea are, because he was a prophet, he was speaking words from God. So this is written from God's point of view. And it says in Hosea chapter 6, "I want to show you love, not offer sacrifices. I want you to know me more than I want burnt offerings." So I'm just going to read that again. "I want to show you love, not offer sacrifices. I want you to know me more than I want burnt offerings." So again, in Moses' law, we read about all these crazy sacrifices that the people had to do to become holy and blameless before God. And then we also read about how Jesus was the perfect sacrifice for those sacrifices. And so that's why we don't have to do them anymore, because he was a perfect sacrifice for all. But this verse, this is before Jesus. And so this is God saying, it's not the sacrifices that I'm after, it's your hearts. Even when all these huge ritualistic sacrifices had to take place, God says, no, I want your heart more than I want these burnt offerings, which is really huge. And actually, if we think about this in terms of the Sabbath, again, God's heart for it for us is the same now as it has always been, in that he wants to give us rest, he wants to replenish us, he wants to refresh us. There's another little Exodus verse, and it says, this is a bit later in the chapter, and it's specific instructions for the Sabbath. And it kind of has all of these instructions for the Sabbath in the chapter. And then in the last little bit it says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, but on the seventh day he stopped working and was refreshed." This is crazy because it says God was refreshed in this passage. Like, I don't think God needed to be refreshed. But in this passage, God was refreshed on the seventh day. And so actually that's his purpose for us, isn't it? To be refreshed. That's why we have a weekend. That's why we don't work 7 days a week, because we will be burnt out and we need to be refreshed and we need to rest. And when I was kind of thinking about this, a wise one of my friends once told me a definition of rest that I didn't know, and it's that rest is not doing anything. It's not sitting down and not moving. Rest is the absence of fear. Rest is the absence of fear. So if we think about that in terms of the Sabbath, what does that mean? Jesus, when he preaches throughout the New Testament, one of the most beautiful and comforting things that he says to the crowds and to his disciples is in Matthew, the end of Matthew, and he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He asks us to cast our cares upon him. He asks us to give him our burdens, because then we find our true rest. So then if we think about that, rest is the absence of fear. And so if we're giving our burdens over to Jesus in that way, then we rest because there's no fear. Because if we're really relying on Jesus and really tapping into that covenant that we have with God, then we rest. Then there's no need for fear. And that's actually a really key part of another kind of thing that they said when Moses received the Ten Commandments. It says, "The Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between me and you from generation to generation." So the Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between me and you from generation to generation. So that covenant, that commitment, that heart that God has for us all the way back in Moses' time when he's given this commandment, comes even now when Jesus says, "Cast your cares on me because I care for you and there is rest to be found." And I just think that is so profound. And challenges us to not just dismiss the teachings of the Old Testament and the teachings of the Ten Commandments even, because they are so important and they are so rich. If we practice them well, and if we practice resting and casting our cares on Jesus well, and resting well, then I think that will be really precious and really life-giving to us.